My husband walked up to me right before the divorce hearing. His face was smug, his designer suit impeccable. "You're getting nothing, Bella," he said, loud enough for everyone in the courthouse hallway to hear. "I've made sure of that. You'll be lucky if you walk out with the clothes on your back." His mistress, Vanessa, stood beside him in a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, smirking like she'd already won. But what Derek didn't know was that I'd spent the last 4 months building a case that would turn his perfect little plan into a federal nightmare. I'm Isabella Chen, though everyone calls me Bella. I'm 34, and for the past 6 years, I've worked as a senior tax auditor for the IRS. I know how people hide money. I know how they lie on their returns, how they shuffle assets, how they think they're smarter than the system. My job is finding the truth buried in spreadsheets and bank statements. Derek knew what I did for a living, but he made one critical mistake. He thought that because I was his wife, I wouldn't use those skills on him. He thought I was too in love, too trusting, too naive. He was wrong. We'd been married for 8 years. 8 years of building what I thought was a partnership. I met Derek when I was 26, fresh out of my master's program in accounting, eager and hopeful. He was 30, charming, ambitious, working his way up in his father's real estate development company. The Fitzgeralds were old Seattle money, the kind of family whose name appeared on hospital wings and museum plaques. Derek had the confidence that comes from never having to worry about money, that easy assurance that the world would always bend in his favor. I fell hard. He was everything I thought I wanted. Handsome, successful, from a family that represented the American dream I'd watched my immigrant parents chase their whole lives. My mom and dad came from China with nothing, worked brutal hours at their restaurant in the International District, saved every penny so I could go to college. When Derek proposed with a stunning ring on a yacht in Puget Sound, I felt like I'd finally made it. Like I'd proven that their sacrifices meant something. The wedding was at the Fairmont Olympic, 200 guests, orchids flown in from Hawaii. Derek's father, Richard Fitzgerald, gave a toast about welcoming me to the family, though I caught the way his smile never quite reached his eyes when he looked at me. His mother had passed years before, and Richard had clear ideas about who was good enough for his son. A Chinese girl whose parents owned a restaurant, wasn't it? But Derek insisted he didn't care what his father thought, that he loved me, that we'd prove everyone wrong. For the first few years, it was good. We bought a gorgeous waterfront condo in Belltown, 3 bedrooms with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. We took trips to Whistler, to Hawaii, to Europe. Derek's business was booming. He was developing luxury condos in Bellevue, modern glass towers for tech executives with more money than sense. I worked my way up at the IRS, handling increasingly complex audits. We talked about kids someday, but Derek always said later, when things settle down. Then, about 18 months ago, things started to shift. Derek became distant, distracted. He blamed it on work stress, big projects, difficult investors. He stayed late at the office more nights than not. He started going to the gym obsessively, buying new clothes, getting haircuts every week instead of every month. The classic signs, though I didn't want to see them. I tried to be understanding. I knew real estate development was demanding. I worked long hours too, especially during tax season. We were both building our careers. That's what I told myself when he'd come home at midnight smelling like expensive perfume that wasn't mine, when he'd get text messages that made him smile in ways I hadn't seen in months, when he'd guard his phone like it contained nuclear codes. The marriage was dying, and somewhere deep down I knew it. But I wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. Not until I had to. The moment that changed everything came 4 months ago, on a rainy Tuesday in October. Seattle rain, the kind that's more mist than drops, that gets into everything. I was at my desk, at the federal building downtown, working through a stack of audit files, when I got flagged by our automated system. Our joint tax return had been selected for review. That happens sometimes. Random selection, nothing sinister. But when I pulled up the file, my stomach dropped. Someone had already requested it. Not random at all. One of my colleagues in the fraud division had opened a case. On us. On Derek. I sat there staring at my screen, my coffee going cold in my hand. This couldn't be right. There had to be a mistake. I called Tom Chen, no relation despite the last name, a senior investigator I'd worked with on complex cases. We had a good professional relationship. He trusted my work. Tom, what's going on? Why is my return flagged? There was a long pause on the other end. Bella, I was going to call you. We need to talk. Not here. Can you meet me for coffee? 20 minutes later, we were sitting in a corner booth at a cafe near the Pike Place Market, away from the office, away from anyone who might overhear. Tom slid a folder across the table to me. His expression was grim. One of our algorithms caught some irregularities, business deductions claimed by Derek's company. Normally wouldn't be an issue, but the amounts were substantial and the documentation looked questionable. So I dug deeper. He paused. Bella, I'm sorry, but your husband has been committing tax fraud, and because you filed jointly, you're technically implicated too. My hands shook as I opened the folder. Inside were printouts of tax returns, business expense reports, invoices. Derek's company had claimed over $300,000 in deductions over the past 2 years. Contractor payments, consultant fees, business development expenses, all legitimate categories. Except when Tom cross-referenced the recipients, half of them didn't exist. Shell companies, fake invoices, money going out, then circling back through a maze of accounts. I know you didn't know, Tom said quietly. I've worked with you long enough to know you'd never be part of something like this. But legally, joint return means joint responsibility, unless you can prove you had no knowledge and no benefit from the fraud. I felt like I was falling down a well, darkness closing in from all sides. What are you saying? I'm saying you need to protect yourself, get separate counsel, cooperate with the investigation. And Bella? He looked at me with something like pity. If he's hiding this from you, what else is he hiding? I went home that night and Derek wasn't there, working late, according to his text. I sat in our beautiful condo with the view of the Sound, watching ferries cross the dark water, and I made a decision. If Derek thought he could throw me under the bus to save himself, if he thought he could use me as cover for his crimes, he was about to learn exactly what a senior IRS auditor could do when she set her mind to it. I didn't confront him. That would have been stupid. Instead, I started investigating. Quietly, methodically, using every skill I'd learned in 6 years of tracking down people who thought they were smarter than the system. First, the tax fraud. I requested copies of every return, every schedule, every supporting document from our files. I made spreadsheets. I traced every dollar claimed as a deduction. Tom had been right. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Payments to Cascade Consulting LLC for business development. Cascade didn't have a website, no business license I could find, no presence anywhere except as a recipient of Derek's checks. I ran the EIN number. It was registered to a P.O. box in Nevada. The signature on the Articles of Incorporation was illegible, but the registered agent was someone named V. Hart. V. Hart. I ran that name through every database I had access to. Vanessa Hart, age 27, living in a luxury apartment in South Lake Union, occupation listed as interior designer. And there, on her Instagram profile, which was public because of course it was, were photos. Lots of photos. Vanessa at expensive restaurants. Vanessa on a ski trip to Whistler, wearing a jacket I recognized because I'd seen it in Derek's closet. Vanessa wearing jewelry I'd never seen her buy, but I'd definitely seen the charges for on our credit card statements, labeled as client gifts. The rage that went through me in that moment was like touching a live wire. It burned through the numbness, through the denial, through the part of me that had been making excuses. He wasn't just cheating. He was using tax fraud to funnel our money to his mistress, and he'd set it up so that if anyone caught on, I'd be the one holding the bag. But I didn't break. I didn't scream or throw things or call him crying. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, opened a new encrypted file on my laptop, and got to work. Over the next 2 weeks, I built a timeline, every payment to Cascade Consulting cross-referenced with Vanessa's social media posts. A $15,000 payment in June corresponded with a post about a surprise trip to Maui, number blessed. A $20,000 payment in August matched with a photo of diamond earrings, early birthday present from Bay. The evidence was damning and so satisfying to compile. But the tax fraud was just the beginning. If Derek was hiding money through fake businesses, what else was he hiding? I started looking at our assets. The condo was in both our names. Purchased 8 years ago. We'd put down $300,000. Derek always said it was his money he'd saved from his salary. But when I pulled our old bank statements, I found the truth. $200,000 had come from my inheritance when my grandmother passed away, money she'd saved her whole life working as a seamstress. The remaining $100,000 had been a gift from Derek's father, according to the memo line, though Derek had always implied he'd earned it himself. The monthly mortgage payments, I'd been making them. Every month for 8 years, I'd transferred money from my account to Derek's, and he'd make the payment from his account. He liked it that way, made him feel like the provider, he'd said. I'd thought it was harmless, letting him have that. Now I saw it for what it was. He wanted to be able to claim he'd paid for everything. Then I found the Whistler property, a vacation home Derek said we'd bought together 3 years ago, except when I pulled the deed, it was in Derek's name only. I'd never noticed because we'd only been there a handful of times. Ski trips, he'd called them romantic getaways. The purchase price was $800,000. I found the funding trail. Another gift from Richard Fitzgerald, this time for $500,000, with Derek putting in $300,000 from his business accounts. But here's where it got interesting. Derek's business accounts shouldn't have had that much liquidity. I knew roughly what his salary was, what the company's profit margins should be. Where did he get $300,000 in cash? I spent a week digging through every financial record I could access. Our joint accounts, our credit card statements, Derek's business bank accounts, which I had login access to because I'd helped him set them up years ago and he'd never changed the passwords. Men like Derek never thought their wives would actually use that access. And I found it. Cryptocurrency wallets. Derek had been converting cash into Bitcoin and Ethereum, holding it in digital wallets, then slowly converting it back to cash when he needed it. The total value? Over $400,000. Money that should have been reported. Money that definitely wasn't on our tax returns. Money he'd hidden so well he thought I'd never find it. I sat back in my chair, staring at my spreadsheet, and I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. This wasn't just infidelity. This wasn't just a husband having an affair. This was systematic, calculated theft from our marriage, from our future, from me, and he'd done it all while making me complicit in his tax fraud. I needed help. Not from the IRS. Not yet. I needed a lawyer, someone who understood that this case wasn't just about dividing assets. This was about preventing a criminal from stealing everything I'd worked for and leaving me holding the evidence of his crimes. My colleague Sarah had gone through a brutal divorce 2 years ago and came out the other side with everything she deserved. When I asked her who represented her, she wrote down a name without hesitation: Patricia Nguyen. She looks like somebody's sweet aunt, but in a courtroom, she's a killer. If you're serious about winning, call her. I called. Miss. Nguyen's office was in a modest building in the International District, nothing like the glass towers downtown where Derek's family lawyer worked. But the moment I walked into her office, I knew Sarah was right. Patricia Nguyen was in her early 50s, gray-haired, wearing a simple blazer and pearls. She offered me tea and settled behind her desk with the calm of someone who'd seen every variation of human awfulness and was no longer surprised by any of it. I laid out everything: the tax fraud, the hidden crypto, the fake business paying his mistress, the properties in Derek's name only, my grandmother's inheritance that funded our condo. I showed her my spreadsheets, my timelines, my evidence. 2 hours of documentation, organized with the precision of the auditor I was. When I finished, Miss Nguyen sat back in her chair and smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a chess player who'd just seen checkmate in 5 moves. Mrs. Fitzgerald, she said, you've just handed me one of the most well-documented cases I've seen in 20 years of practice. Your husband isn't just exposed in divorce court. He's exposed federally. The question is, how far do you want to take this? I want what's mine, I said. I want him to lose everything he tried to steal from me, and I want to make sure he can never use me as a scapegoat for his crimes. Then here's what we're going to do. Miss Nguyen leaned forward. We're going to file for divorce, but we're not going to show our hand. Let him think you're just a heartbroken wife who caught him cheating. Let him be confident, overconfident, Let him bring his expensive lawyer and his mistress and his attitude into that courtroom, thinking he's going to steamroll you, and then we're going to present every single piece of evidence you've gathered. Every fraudulent deduction, every hidden crypto wallet, every dollar he funneled to his girlfriend while claiming poverty in the marriage, we're going to make sure the judge sees exactly who Derek Fitzgerald is. And then, if you're willing, we're going to make sure the federal prosecutor sees it too. I thought about my parents, working 80-hour weeks so I could have opportunities they never did. I thought about my grandmother, saving every penny of her seamstress wages to leave me something, money Derek had used and claimed as his own. I thought about 8 years of my life, of believing in a partnership that was always just him taking and me giving. I'm willing, I said. For the next 3 months, I lived a double life. During the day, I went to work, audited tax returns, had lunch with colleagues. In the evenings, I came home to Derek, made small talk about our days, slept in the same bed as a man I now saw clearly for what he was. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, pretending everything was normal while building the case that would destroy him. Derek didn't notice anything wrong. Why would he? In his mind, I was still the same naive Bella who believed his lies, who trusted him, who would never question where the money went or why he came home late. I was useful to him, the good wife who made him look stable, who filed joint tax returns that gave him cover, who could be discarded when he was ready to upgrade to Vanessa. One night, about 2 months into my investigation, Derek came home early. He was in a good mood, whistling as he put his briefcase down. "Bella," he said, "we need to talk." My heart rate spiked, but I kept my face neutral. "About what?" "I think it's time we admitted this isn't working. The marriage. We've grown apart. It happens." He said it casually, like he was discussing changing internet providers. "I think we should get a divorce. Amicably, no drama, we split things 50-50 and move on." I looked at him, this man I'd loved, who was proposing to steal everything from me with a smile on his face. 50-50? I asked carefully. "Well, roughly. The condo, I'll buy out your half. The Whistler place is in my name anyway, so that stays with me. We split the savings. You keep your retirement accounts, I keep mine. Simple, clean, fair. Fair. The word almost made me laugh. He'd stolen $400,000 in cryptocurrency, funneled $180,000 to his mistress, committed federal tax fraud that implicated me, and he wanted to call a 50-50 split fair. "I'll need to think about it," I said. "Sure, take your time." He patted my shoulder like I was a good dog. "Just don't drag it out, okay? I'd like to get this done before the new year." "I'll bet you would," I thought. "Before the IRS audit gets too deep, before anyone asks too many questions, before your perfect little plan falls apart." That night, I told Miss Nguyen what Derek proposed. She laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, this is perfect. File your response. Turn down his offer. Make him file for divorce himself. Let him commit to his story in court documents. Every lie he tells now is just more ammunition." Derek filed 3 weeks later. I got served at work, which was humiliating and probably intentional. His petition painted me as an unemployed housewife, claiming I'd contributed nothing to the marriage, that all assets were his separate property or his earnings. It was breathtakingly dishonest. The lies just made my resolve stronger. The divorce hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in February. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I kept going over the evidence, making sure every document was in order, every number checked. Miss Nguyen had prepared a thick binder, organized with tabs and highlights. It was beautiful in its completeness. "Bella," she told me at our final prep session, "Derek is going to try to rattle you tomorrow. He's going to be cruel. He might bring Vanessa. His lawyer will paint you as a gold digger, someone trying to steal what he built. You need to stay calm. Don't react. We have the truth on our side, and in the end, that's all that matters." I nodded, but my hands shook. This was it. Everything came down to tomorrow. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. A navy suit, professional but not flashy. Pearl earrings my mother had given me, my hair pulled back in a neat bun. I looked exactly like what I was, a federal employee, a serious professional, someone who dealt in facts. When I walked into the King County Courthouse, Derek was already there, and yes, he'd brought Vanessa. She wore a red dress that was completely inappropriate for a courthouse, sky-high heels, full makeup. She hung on Derek's arm like a trophy, and when she saw me, she actually smirked. Derek looked smug in his tailored suit. He walked over to me, with Vanessa trailing behind, and I could smell his cologne, the expensive kind I used to buy him for Christmas. "Bella," he said, loud enough for the people on the benches to hear. "Last chance to be reasonable. Walk away with what I offered, or walk away with nothing. Your choice." I looked at him. This man who'd shared my bed for 8 years, who'd promised to love and cherish me, who'd stolen from me and lied to me and thought I was too stupid to notice. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him the way I'd look at a tax return that didn't add up, with professional distance and complete certainty that I'd find every discrepancy. My silence clearly bothered him. "You're going to regret this," he said. "My lawyer is going to destroy you in there. You'll be lucky to get the furniture." Vanessa giggled, a high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. "Derek, don't be mean. Maybe let her keep her clothes at least?" Though honestly, she could use a whole new wardrobe. She looked me up and down dismissively. "When we move into the condo, I'm redecorating anyway. That whole vibe is so dated." I still didn't respond. "Miss." Nguyen appeared at my elbow, small and calm. "Mr. Fitzgerald," she said politely, "I'd save your energy for the courtroom. You're going to need it." Derek's lawyer, a man named Jonathan Price from one of the big downtown firms, looked bored. He'd clearly done 1,000 divorces just like this one, rich husband versus ordinary wife, easy win. He didn't even glance at the binder, miss. Nguyen was carrying. The bailiff called us in. The courtroom was exactly like every legal drama makes them look. Wood paneling, state seal, American flag, worn carpet that muffled footsteps. Judge Sandra Morrison presided, a black woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she'd heard every lie ever told. Price started his opening, all confidence. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case. My client, Derek Fitzgerald, is a successful real estate developer. He's been the sole breadwinner throughout this marriage. The respondent, Miss Chen, worked sporadically at best and contributed virtually nothing to the acquisition of assets. My client is generously offering a settlement of $50,000, which is more than fair given her lack of contribution. We ask the court to grant the divorce and divide assets according to the prenuptial agreement terms." I almost reacted to that. "Prenup? We didn't have a prenup, but I caught Miss Nguyen's slight headshake. "Wait. Your Honor," Miss Nguyen stood, "we strenuously object to the characterization of my client's contributions. We also note there is no prenuptial agreement in this marriage. None was ever signed. If Mr. Price is suggesting otherwise, we'd like to see this alleged document." Price looked momentarily confused, shuffled papers. "My client indicated there was an agreement about separate property." "Talking about something and having a legal document are two different things, Counselor," Judge Morrison said dryly. "Do you have a signed prenup or not?" "I'll need to confer with my client, Your Honor." "Do that." The judge looked unimpressed. "Miss Nguyen, your response to the petition?" This was it. Miss Nguyen opened her binder. "Your Honor, my client not only contributed to this marriage, she funded it. The marital home, a 3-bedroom condo in Belltown, was purchased 8 years ago with a down payment of $300,000. $200,000 of that came from Miss Chen's inheritance from her late grandmother. This is her separate property, not subject to division. Furthermore, my client has been making the monthly mortgage payments for 8 years from her personal account. We have bank statements showing every transfer." She handed a stack of documents to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. Derek's face went pale. He hadn't known I'd kept all those records. "In addition," Miss Nguyen continued, her voice gaining strength, "there's the matter of Mr. Fitzgerald's tax fraud. Over the past 2 years, he's claimed over $300,000 in false business deductions, paying money to shell companies and then recovering it through various accounts. One of these shell companies, Cascade Consulting LLC, is owned by Miss Vanessa Hart, who is, I note, sitting in this courtroom as Mr. Fitzgerald's companion." Vanessa's smirk disappeared. Derek looked like he'd been punched. Price started to stand up. then sat back down, clearly realizing he'd walked into something bigger than a routine divorce. Furthermore, Miss Nguyen was relentless, Mr. Fitzgerald has hidden over $400,000 in cryptocurrency wallets, funds that were never reported on the couple's joint tax returns. We have the wallet addresses, transaction histories, and can trace every deposit and withdrawal. These are marital funds that were hidden with the intent to defraud both the IRS and my client. Judge Morrison's expression had shifted from bored to very, very interested. Counselor, these are serious allegations. Do you have evidence? Extensive evidence, Your Honor. Bank records, blockchain transaction histories, copies of false tax returns, and correspondence between Mr. Fitzgerald and Miss Hart discussing the payment structure, all notarized and verified. Additionally, Mr. Fitzgerald purchased a vacation home in Whistler in his name only, using marital funds and misrepresenting it as his separate property. The deed shows no mention of Miss Chen, despite the property being acquired during the marriage. I watched Derek's face cycle through emotions: shock, anger, fear, panic. He leaned over to whisper furiously to Price, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Your Honor, Price managed, we'd like to request a recess to review these allegations. I'm sure you would, Judge Morrison said. But I'd like to hear the rest of Miss Nguyen's presentation first. Continue, Counselor. Miss Nguyen smiled, and it was not kind. Thank you, Your Honor. Given the extensive fraud and misappropriation of marital funds, we're requesting that the Belltown condo be awarded entirely to Miss Chen as her separate property, funded by her inheritance and maintained by her labor. We're requesting equal division of all legitimately acquired assets. We're requesting Mr. Fitzgerald pay compensatory damages for the funds he diverted to Miss Hart, which total approximately $180,000. And finally, we believe these financial irregularities should be referred to the appropriate federal authorities for investigation. The courtroom was silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing and was staring. Derek stood up abruptly. This is insane. You can't do this. Bella, tell them you're lying. This is all made up. Judge Morrison's gavel came down hard. Mr. Fitzgerald, sit down and be quiet, or I'll have you removed from this courtroom. Derek sat, but his leg was bouncing, his face red. Vanessa had scooted slightly away from him on the bench, her eyes wide. Mr. Price, the judge said, does your client have a response to these allegations? Evidence to the contrary? Price looked down at his notes, which suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. Your Honor, I was not informed of these issues. I'd need significant time to review the evidence and prepare a response. This is highly irregular. What's irregular, Counselor, is a petitioner claiming to be the sole contributor to a marriage while simultaneously hiding hundreds of thousands of dollars and committing tax fraud. Judge Morrison was not smiling. I'm going to call a 30-minute recess. Mr. Price, I suggest you have a very frank conversation with your client, Miss Nguyen. Make copies of your evidence available to opposing counsel. We'll reconvene and see if Mr. Fitzgerald would like to revise his petition. During the recess, I sat in the hallway with Miss Nguyen. Through the glass door, I could see Derek and Price in heated discussion. Derek was gesturing wildly. Price was shaking his head. At one point, Price actually stood up and walked away, and Derek followed him, clearly begging. Vanessa sat alone on the bench, staring at her phone. After a few minutes, she got up and walked over to where we were sitting. Up close, she looked younger than her photos, and scared. Miss Chen, she said quietly, can I talk to you? Just for a minute? Miss Nguyen started to object, but I held up my hand. It's okay. What do you want? Vanessa sat down, carefully, like the bench might break. I didn't know, she said. About the tax stuff. About him using me as a cover for fraud. He told me the company was legitimate, that he hired me to consult on property staging, that the payments were legal. I did do some work, I swear, but not that much. He said the rest was gifts because he loved me. Her voice cracked. I believed him. I'm not a criminal. I don't want to go to prison because Derek lied to me. I looked at her, this woman who'd been sleeping with my husband, who'd posted photos flaunting jewelry bought with money stolen from our marriage, and I saw what she was, Young, naive, used, just like I'd been used, in a different way. "What are you saying?" I asked. "I'm saying if you need me to testify, to give you access to the Cascade records, to cooperate, I will. I don't want any part of this anymore. I just want to walk away clean." She glanced back at Derek through the glass. "I thought he was going to leave you for me, start over, that we'd have this great life. But he's been lying to me too. Hasn't he? There's no money, just debt, and fraud, and prison." Miss Nguyen and I exchanged a look. "If you're serious, Miss," Nguyen said carefully, "you need your own lawyer. You need to negotiate immunity for your cooperation. But yes, if you testify honestly about the Cascade payments and turn over the company records, that would be very helpful." Vanessa nodded. She looked like she might cry. "I was so stupid. He made me feel special, you know?" Said his wife didn't understand him, all the classic lines. And I fell for it. She looked at me directly. "I'm sorry. That's probably worthless to you, but I am. This wasn't supposed to ruin your life. It wasn't supposed to ruin mine either." Before I could respond, the bailiff called us back in. Vanessa hurried away, and I noticed she didn't sit with Derek anymore. She took a seat at the back of the courtroom, alone. When we reconvened, Price looked defeated. "Your Honor, my client would like to propose a revised settlement." "I'm sure he would," Judge Morrison said. "I'd like to hear it." Mr. Fitzgerald concedes that Miss Chen's inheritance funded a substantial portion of the marital home and agrees she should retain that property. He proposes splitting other assets equitably and requests leniency given his cooperation in resolving these matters quickly. Miss Nguyen didn't hesitate. "Not acceptable, Your Honor. My client isn't interested in leniency for someone who committed systemic fraud against her and the federal government. We maintain our petition in full." Judge Morrison reviewed the documents in front of her, taking her time. Finally, she looked up. "I've reviewed the evidence presented by Miss Nguyen, and I find it compelling and well documented. The court awards the Belltown property to Miss Chen as her separate property. The Whistler property, purchased with marital funds regardless of whose name is on the deed, will be sold and proceeds split evenly. Mr. Fitzgerald will pay Miss Chen $90,000 in compensatory damages for funds diverted to Miss Hart, payable within 90 days. All cryptocurrency holdings are to be disclosed fully within 72 hours and split evenly. Any failure to disclose will result in contempt charges." Derek's face was gray. "Your Honor, I don't have $90,000 liquid. The crypto values fluctuate. I'd need time." "Then I suggest you liquidate assets quickly, Mr. Fitzgerald. That's not my concern." Judge Morrison's gaze was ice-cold. "Additionally, I'm referring this case to the U.S. Attorney's Office for review of potential tax fraud and money laundering. This court doesn't take kindly to litigants who lie under oath and attempt to defraud their spouses through criminal means. Divorce granted. This court is adjourned." The gavel came down with a finality that echoed through my bones. It was over. I'd won. More than won. I'd taken everything he tried to steal and turned it back on him. Derek sat frozen in his chair as people filed out. Price packed up quickly, clearly wanting distance from his client. I stood up, gathered my things, and walked toward the exit. As I passed Derek, he grabbed my arm. "Bella," he said, and his voice was desperate. "You can't do this. The IRS investigation, they'll come after the company, after my father's businesses. Do you know what you've done? You've destroyed everything." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then at his face. "No, Derek. You destroyed everything when you decided to steal from me, lie to me, and use me as cover for your crimes. I just made sure you paid the bill." I pulled my arm free and walked out of the courtroom. Miss Nguyen was waiting in the hall, and she gave me a small, satisfied nod. "Well done, Mrs. Chen. Or, I suppose it's Miss Chen again now." "Bella," I said. Just Bella. As we walked down the courthouse steps, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Vanessa. My lawyer is contacting the U.S. attorney about immunity. Thank you for not destroying me too. And I'm sorry. Truly." I didn't respond, just deleted the message. Outside, the Seattle sky was doing what it does best. Gray drizzle, Mist hanging in the air, the smell of salt water from the Sound. But it felt clean, fresh, like the air after a storm. 3 months later, Derek was indicted on 7 counts of tax fraud and money laundering. The IRS seized his assets, including the Whistler property which had to be sold to pay back taxes. His father, Richard Fitzgerald, issued a public statement disavowing Derek's actions and removing him from the family business. The Seattle Times ran a whole story about it. Real estate developer faces federal charges after divorce reveals fraud scheme. I testified at the grand jury hearing, walked the prosecutors through every document, every transfer, every lie. Vanessa testified too, granted immunity in exchange for her cooperation. On the stand, she admitted Derek had used her, lied to her, made her part of his scheme without her knowledge. I almost felt sorry for her. Derek took a plea deal eventually. 3 years in federal prison, 5 years probation, restitution to the IRS, and permanent prohibition from working in real estate development. His lawyer tried to get him minimum security, white-collar resort prison. The judge sent him to a medium security facility in California. Not dangerous, but not comfortable either. I sold the Belltown condo. Too many memories, too much of Derek still lingering in the walls. I bought a smaller place in Capitol Hill, cozy and mine alone. With the money left over and the settlement from Derek, I started a nonprofit, the Chen Foundation for Women's Financial Independence. We offer free financial literacy workshops, help women in difficult marriages understand their rights, teach them how to protect their assets, and document their contributions. We've helped over 200 women in the first year alone. My parents were shocked when they learned everything that happened. My mother cried, saying she'd never trusted Derek fully but hadn't wanted to interfere. My father just held my hand and told me he was proud of me for being strong. We had dinner at their restaurant, and for the first time in years, I felt like myself again. As for me, I'm good. I got a promotion at work, leading a task force on cryptocurrency fraud. Turns out my experience tracking Derek's hidden wallets made me an expert. I date sometimes, but I'm in no rush. I've learned that I'm fine on my own, that I don't need someone else to feel complete. Sometimes I think about those 8 years with Derek, about the woman I was who believed his lies, who trusted blindly, who thought love meant not asking questions. I don't regret leaving her behind. She was kind, but she was naive. I'm kinder now, in a way, because I understand how easily people can be manipulated. But I'm not naive. I'll never be naive again. And honestly, I've never been happier. Freedom, it turns out, is worth more than any condo, any marriage, any lie told by a man who thought I was too small to fight back. He was wrong. And now he knows it. If you liked my story, go ahead and subscribe to my channel, Martha's Stories. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what you'd do in my situation. I've got more stories that might surprise you. Thanks for listening.